Hi, guys, and welcome to the Well Acquainted podcast, where we empower our communities one episode at a time, one perspective at a time. Within our communities, we may not always have the same perspective, but we work to come to a common ground. Today, we're going to be talking about the potential confirmation of Judge Ketanj Brown Jackson. But before we actually go,
it's Ketanji.
Is it Ketanji?
It's Ketanji. Ketanj Brown Jackson.
Ketanj Brown Jackson. But before we get into the Senate hearings, we're actually going to be talking about the controversy that surrounded this administration announcing, before we even knew who the nominee was going to be, that they announced that they will be choosing a Black woman as a SCOTUS nominee. So before I get into the controversy, I'm going to give Nneka an opportunity to respond.
Yeah, no. So pretty much what you said, I'll just echo. Yeah, this podcast, we're very excited. For those who are tuning in through Apple Podcasts or Spotify, thanks for continuing to tune in. But this is also exciting because we are doing this for the first time via video. And so we're hoping to put this on YouTube. So for those who are watching, this is special because it's our first time actually doing a video. Aside from that, no, like essentially echoing everything you said, I'm really excited to be having this discussion today, talking about Ketanj Brown Jackson and her being the first Black woman to be nominated. I mean, it's obviously historic. And then in addition to that, to what you said, yeah, we're going to be discussing about the controversy that really took place at Georgetown Law with Professor Shapiro. So I'll kind of let you take the lead on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was some controversy even before we even knew who the SCOTUS nominee was going to be. So this was a Georgetown professor who made these comments on Twitter on a national public platform. And I'm just going to read to you the tweet that he stated. He said, objectively, best pick for Biden is Srinivasan, who is so progressive and very smart, even has identity politics, benefit of being first American, but alas, does not fit into the latest intersectionality hierarchy, so we'll get a lesser Black woman. Thank heaven for small favors. Interesting. So before I respond, I want to give the floor to Nneka first to, have your initial thoughts, respond on what do you think about that tweet?
Yeah. So in my opinion, one, inappropriate. And just to give you all, the audience who's listening, some context, he is currently, before he made this tweet, was in the process of being promoted to senior lecturer at Georgetown Law as faculty. In addition to that, he was going to head their Center of Constitution. So prior to tweeting this, he was on his way to those two promotions. After this tweet came out, students like the Black Law Student Association of Georgetown Law had a petition, I believe, of 600 plus signatures, just repudiating his moving forward and his promotions, in addition to other faculty that made noise about how inappropriate this was. And so you are aware, as of now, presently, he has been on temporary paid leave. So he's not a teaching faculty there right now as a result of his tweets, and particularly because the dean of the law school has made a statement, and also other administrators of the law school has said that his tweet was a violation of their professional code of conduct. Notwithstanding that, we need to keep in mind that there is academic freedom, that the law school, and suspending him in any particular university or private institution like Georgetown, most faculty and administrators have the academic freedom as public intellects, as public figures, if you will, in the academia framework to make comments on public discourse, which is what he did. So that's just context that I'm giving the audience. But back to what my opinion is and how I feel about it, I also think it's in violation of the professional code of conduct. And that's really what it gets down to in regards to what's going to happen to him. I do think his comment really evidenced racism, in my opinion, really evidenced prejudice and bias.
So I think we should make it clear for our audience that he did say these comments before we actually knew who was going to be the nominee for this administration. So he wasn't talking specifically about Judge Jackson, but just what was going on as far as this administration announcing that, Biden was going to be choosing a Black woman as a SCOTUS nominee. So I think that's good to keep in mind. I was
Absolutely.
also going to say that he actually backpedaled. He actually made a statement to Reason magazine, and it says, quote, "I regret my poor choice of words which undermine my message that no one should be discriminated against his or her gender or skin color."
I mean, of course. I would expect him to apologize, right? I mean, especially after the backlash he received by faculty, which he did, and students who are her law students at Georgetown Law. Not to mention, Georgetown Law is, I believe, not only a top law school, but a current top law school that's educating more Black women than any other law school in our nation as it stands today. And so we also have to think about, even if they were to bring him back and say he continued on with his promotion, what type of impact, adverse impact, is that going to have on students and how they're going to feel knowing that he's coming back, particularly Black students, right? And particularly at Georgetown, because they do enroll such a high proportion of Black women opposed to any other top law school in our nation.
So I don't understand. Like, when I heard that he backpedaled and he apologized, I didn't really understand. When you say something like that on a national platform, on Twitter, you want people to respond. You are saying this national. So for you to backtrack, I'm like, just stand by what you said. You know what I mean? Like, stand by what you say. Like, don't coward back. So that was my first response to seeing him essentially apologize for what he had said. So in regards to my response to his first comments, which he made while he was a professor at Georgetown Law, I think it is a little bit insensitive because he is teaching students from a multicultural perspective, all nationalities, all ethnicities of students. So I think it is a bit insensitive to say those things. However, outside of his professional capacity as a law professor, I believe he has a First Amendment right to say whatever he wants to say. And something that I noticed with certain political parties, particularly the left, just looking back on past occurrences, because I do believe that past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. And typically what we've seen from the left and from this administration is when they want to push a certain agenda that is going to impact, in my opinion, in a negative capacity in our minority communities, in our country, in our society, we see them pushing that agenda behind minorities, specifically African Americans. But I will also say that when I saw this, I just wasn't really excited because, you look at what happened with President Obama, VP Harris, and these individuals come off really likable, right? So they come off likable, come off very, very competent. But when they get into office, things quickly become a disaster from my point of view. So, and when you comment on it, it's like, okay, well, you're a bigot, it's racist, it's biased. So for me, it's not really about the competency, but are they putting these individuals in from a racial perspective or a minority perspective so people won't criticize them because they're minority?
I would say, in regards to his apology, and I think he also made another apology, if I recall correctly, to the law school directly, saying that his choice of words were inartful, quote unquote, inartful. While some may find that apology enough, how I think of it is, when you tweeted that, that's exactly what you thought. That's not the first time he had made a comment, particularly from the Democratic Party when they've nominated for Justice Sotomayor. He had came out publicly and made commentary about her. To some extent, she may not have been as qualified because of her race. So that's also questionable and concerning in light of this recent activity by this professor. And I don't think from a constitutional and legal standpoint that Georgetown's actions presently are in any way, and I'm not saying you think that, but we have to be clear on that. It's not violative. It's not an abridgment of his freedom of speech under the First Amendment. This is not what this controversy is about. What it really comes down to is whether he violated, by way of that tweet, professional code of conduct at Georgetown Law. And many would argue, yes, I agree with that proposition. And the last thing I want to note in regards to his tweet is Georgetown Law has had several problems in the past with professors at the law school, and particularly, I mean, just 2 weeks after this tweet, you had a professor, a law school professor, who referred to an Asian American student, reference him as Chinaman. So, that's just an example of they're having problems there. Clearly, you have faculty that are just completely uneducated when it comes to individual biases and prejudice, and how you should be referring and speaking and the things you publicly tweet in regards to people who are not your race. I mean, there was another episode weeks before this of another Georgetown law professor who was caught on video making derogatory comments about her Black students and people of color and why they're not doing as well. So, Georgetown Law is going through it right now, and hopefully all of that culminated, they will make the right choice, but also make them rethink who they're hiring. I'm excited about this nominee, Judge Brown Jackson, and I mean, there's so much to talk about with the hearings and what we've seen these past few days.
There's a lot to talk about, and I kind of have to stand by what I said previously, is that, these individuals, especially Judge Jackson, again, come off very likable, come off extremely competent, come off extremely professional. But because of what has happened in this administration, as far as them putting or pushing certain individuals that are minorities into their political party, and we see them and everyone's excited. But then when they get in the office, a lot of their policies and, a lot of their values negatively impact our society, our country. So that's why, for me, I'm not excited. And I mean, I don't know if you want to jump right into the Senate hearing, but
well, and rightfully so. You're rightfully so on your own personal opinions. I mean, obviously, if people have tuned in, she's definitely come down with cases and opinions during her time as a district court judge for the DC, and currently on the DC circuit for the Court of Appeals, that have not necessarily been arguably favorable towards our communities or whatever interest you may identify with. And some would think otherwise. I mean, she certainly has, I've read 3 of her opinions in pretty notable cases as it concerns workers' rights. For those who know, I'm a labor law attorney, and they've been favorable towards workplace and employees. So that's one of the reasons why I kind of support her. And other opinions that she's opined in too, where I've agreed with those decisions. I haven't read all her nearly 600, close to 600 opinions, but from the most 3 notable cases I've read of her, I do tend to side with her in a way that I don't think the conservative party would side for her if I were to reference those opinions.
So for me, so I think a lot of concerns that individuals have, and I believe on both political forms, because, I don't necessarily just associate policies or belief or values such as pro-life just with one particular party. I think that you can have those views on whatever party that you choose to identify with. But for individuals, especially in our country that are pro-life, I was able to read a brief that she helped write when she was in private practice as an associate. And within that brief, it had specifically said that pro-life, well, like the women that were pro-life that they were referring to in the case were, quote, hostile, noisy, hostile crowd of noisy protesters. And for me, regardless of how you are defending your client from whatever sort of personal opinion that you may have, to hear that during a Senate hearing from a potential judge who is likely to be confirmed to SCOTUS, and to be an American that is pro-life, and I hear that that's not exciting because, back to our first episode, like we see how abortion and, terminating pregnancies has affected not only the minority community, which we know the statistics on that, but just our society. I think in total, it's like 63 million children from Roe v. Wade have been terminated. So when you look at the numbers and you look at pretty much her views on that, of what we can look at, again, not excited. So again, it goes back to how, this particular administration, the left, is like essentially pushing their agenda behind a minority person. And when you criticize them, it's like, oh, well, you're hating. She's a Black woman. Oh, you're racist. Oh, you're a bigot. And for me, I just don't think that's fair. So when I heard that, that was a red flag for me. Also, bringing up CRT, which was also mentioned in the Senate hearings as well. She sits on the board of Georgetown Day School, I believe. Yeah. So that's a private school here in DC, and she sits on the board. And within the hearing, it was talked about how children at that school where she sits on the board, are being taught CRT in kindergarten. So again, going back to this progressive education, is this really going to be beneficial to our society? No, in my opinion. So again, not excited at all.
Yeah, and I mean, again, that completely makes sense with your what you identify with and what you support and don't support. As you indicated, you're pro life. In regards to the CRT and Ted Cruz, just very, in my opinion, blatant, obnoxious, just attack on her because she sits on the board as a board member for the Georgetown Day School.
But why do you think it was an attack?
I mean, if you watched how he questioned her, the questioning itself was an attack. And he kept going on. I mean, that's just from my own observance, but she also made it very clear in that line of questioning that her role, and we need to be very clear on this for those who are listening, and she also stated in her hearings that her role as a board member, she doesn't in no way impacts or they discuss the academics, the education that the curriculum, in other words, that takes place at Georgetown Day School as a board member. She made that very clear. So let's make sure we are aware of that. And secondly, CRT has played no role, which she also made clear during her testimony, in her role as a judge, in her role as a judge in the Court of Appeals right now, and when she was a district court judge. So she continuously informed Ted Cruz of that when he was questioning her about the CRT, making it clear to him, and he should know as someone who was a prior law clerk of Supreme Court justice, her role as a judge has not at all implicated CRT, let alone her role as a board member at Georgetown Day School. But this is what I think that he was doing, and that many of the Republicans were doing tactically in their line of questioning, is trying to subscribe her, trying to associate her with a notion that she's pro CRT. Just because she sits on the board of a Georgetown Day School that educates CRT, she made it very clear that her role as a board member, they don't even go and they don't discuss or have no discretion when it comes to the curriculum. But this is what they do. I'm sure Ted Cruz has aspirations for running for president. Most of Americans are watching this. And I thought it was, in my opinion, very inappropriate, unfair to her to try to associate her with CRT.
So just to jump in, because something that I definitely want to touch on that certain political parties do, specifically the left, is that because a person is being questioning, oh, that's an attack. Oh, they're trying to associate her with CRT. No, they're trying to see how she could potentially rule on a lot of controversial topics that are being fostered in our country. They want to see if parental rights in our country for parents who may not have the funds to send their children to private schools and have to send their children to public schools, because for me, I didn't go to a private school. I went to a public school. So having that constitutional right as a parent to be able to have input in regards to their children being taught CRT, or choosing to say, you know what, I don't agree with that being in our classrooms from a public school standpoint. That's part of the interest of the American people, to really ensure that parental rights in regards to CRT and subjects that may be taught within the public schools, parents still have a say in that. So when we talk about questioning and, oh, it's an attack, or, oh, they're trying to see if she's a proponent of CRT, I disagree with that. And I mean, bringing up how she was also questioned to define what a woman is. And she—
Well, before you go into woman, I want to make a quick point before I lose my train of thought in regards to CRT. I agree that they may have been trying to implore what her position was on parental rights if this issue were to ever come before our Supreme Court justices, because presently right now it has not. That may have been a well-intentioned, and Senator Cruz's line of questioning and other Republican senators on that committee's questioning. But what I found, and when I go back and say it was completely wrong and inappropriate, is that when she initially answered those questions, he kept going on. She had told him she's never issued any type of opinion that even remotely, was relative or discussed CRT. And yet he still continued to associate her with this theory. She then told him, as her role as a board member, they don't have any role in the curriculum that takes place at Georgetown Day School.
And that's why he kept questioning her on that. She sits on the board at a private school which is teaching CRT. She does have, it's hard to believe that she does not have a say or some sort of influence on this particular school teaching CRT. That's hard to believe. So that's why he kept questioning her, because that's hard for me to believe.
Yeah. Well, I was more disappointed in the way he questioned her. It was demeaning, and that goes above beyond CRT. I mean, you clearly want to talk about Senator Blackburn's question with woman, but I thought his line of questioning for CRT and other ways he questioned her was just inappropriate. And I also note that they went to law school together. They both went to Harvard Law. I think he graduated a year before him, so there's some camaraderie. While maybe years ago that you would think there'd be some camaraderie and level of respect, and in my opinion, from observing that line of questioning, the way he questioned her, at times interrupted her, it was demeaning, it was disrespectful, it was disparaging, given her record. I mean, she's probably more qualified than him, if not most of the people on that Judiciary Committee. So that was really my problem, is the way he questioned her. And in my opinion, I think he really did, although you may disagree, try to associate her with the theory. Regardless, we can go on and argue whether she actually plays a role in the curriculum or not. I do think after she had told him, and I imagine she's being honest, as someone who's in law and sits on the bench, her testimony was very honest, that he did in some ways associated her with theory. And that, in my opinion, is just not right, and it's unfair.
Just kind of pivoting back to what you said, about him interrupting her, and the line of questioning was, really inappropriate from what you said. For me, the reason why it really got to that point is, from my perspective, she wasn't answering the question. And sometimes when we see an individual trying to dodge a question, for me, that's a red flag that, okay, is there something more to this? Because I find it very hard to believe of what you're saying. So
what question was she not answering?
So, specifically about the CRT. So from my point of view, when he first asked the question, she wasn't answering the question. So I just want to make that very, very clear. So, maybe that's why he was pushing back. So I don't think it's inappropriate to question a potential SCOTUS justice. That is, a bad thing to do from my perspective, or, not appropriate or disrespectful, any of that. And speaking of Harvard Law has their own issues. They're currently being sued by the Asian community for essentially, the affirmative action and, discrimination in regards to these individuals not being admitted, because they are admitting, other minorities that are not Asian, and these Asian, individuals are qualified to be there. So Harvard has their own issues, and there's a lot that's going on from that school. So
his line of questioning, in my opinion, from his observance, was inappropriate after she had answered his questions initially. I mean, so you're saying he had asked her questions about CRT. Well, what specific question? I'm asking, and you're not telling me, because he asked her several questions about CRT. He actually had exhibits up at the time he was asking the question. So what specific question did she not answer? Because I'm curious, because I watched pretty much all 3 days while working, all of it. So I don't recall her not answering a question. While some of her answers may have been vague, I think so too. I never recall her saying, I don't know, or not answering a question.
Oh yeah, she didn't answer a lot of questions, and we're gonna get to that. Specifically, she was asked, "What is a woman?" And she said, "No, I can't. I'm not a biologist." That is very concerning for me because first, really, just as an American, and really as someone who has went to law school, for you to be able to bring a case, you have to have standing. And of course, cases, there are cases who are being brought to federal court for, discrimination based on gender. That's just how it is. So for you to have like the standing to even bring these cases, you have to essentially prove that you are a biological male or a biological female and that you're being, discriminated against based on these characteristics. So how can you bring a case and your presiding judge won't even make the determination of what's a biological male or female? Cases are being brought based on discrimination on, all types of stuff, but specifically with the discrimination on, the color of people's skin and, in high school sports, competing against trans men. I mean, you just have a lot that's going on. And like, I think based on my perspective is this administration is really pushing neutrality when it comes to gender. And I don't think that's really beneficial to our society.
Yeah, in regards to Senator Blackburn's question, asking her what is a woman, if I recall, I think she started in answering, let's be clear for the record, she started in answering and saying in what context. To some extent, that was her first question answered, Judge Brown Jackson. And then she then proceeded to say, I'm not a biologist. In my opinion, Senator Blackburn asking that question, which to your point, Democrat and Republican, they all want to know how she's going to side on certain cases that come before the Supreme Court. So the reason, in my opinion, she asked that question, because she simply wanted to know, are you going to be a proponent of LGBTQI rights? Or are you going to support heterosexual men and women? That was, in my opinion, Senator Blackburn's intent in asking that question. That's why she asked, define a woman. Would I have asked it that way? No. And I think it was actually appropriate for Judge Brown Jackson to answer the way that she did, because again, this is an intelligent woman. She's not stupid. She's not someone to be played with. So when she heard that question, I imagine she knew what Senator Blackburn was getting at, because I do from a legal perspective. And if that case, a case like that, were to come before the Supreme Court, because there's a lot of things going on in public schools right now where we're seeing legislators introduce bills trying to say that if you're a transgender woman or man, you can't play these sports or you can't enter these restrooms. So I know that as an attorney, and Judge Brown Jackson knows that as a judge who's been sitting on the bench for nearly 10 years. So I think she answered the question very fair and reasonable from a legal perspective, especially because we have seen a lot of bills right now that are being passed addressing transgender women and men's rights in public schools. So that was Senator Blackburn's intent in asking that question. And I think Judge Brown Jackson answered the best way that she could as someone who may be confirmed to the court.
So remaining neutral, for me is not necessarily goes to, can you answer a biological question? Because some things from my perspective, from a legal perspective, are just bright line rules. Okay, so what is a biological man? What is a biological woman? So for me, what's the controversy in that? But I think because of our society and our culture now, there has been a lot of controversy in a certain agenda in regards to that. And from her question, from how she answered that particular question, she immediately said, no, I can't. And when she answered that question, I heard it. And from an American point of view, I kind of heard some, essentially animosity, like, no, I'm not going to define a man or a woman. And, to be very, very, quaint and honest, she's the first individual who cannot define a biological man or a woman that is in a Senate hearing. So again, it goes back to are young girls' rights who are competing in high school, in college against biological men, are their interests going to be acknowledged at the Supreme Court level? That is why she was being questioning in that. Now, I ran track and field in college, full scholarship, D1. And like I'm saying this because now things have completely changed. You have a trans man at the University of Pennsylvania who is competing as a woman and is shattering all the records in the NCAA up and down, which he should. But his teammates are frustrated because they have no chance. They are biological women, so they're not able to compete against a biological man. So when you've been in sports, when you've been a young girl and you're trying to be the best at your sport and you have to compete against biological men, you want to know that your interest is being protected at the Supreme Court level. I don't think that's anything wrong with that. And for biological men, they want to know that their interests are being protected, especially when it comes to custody battles, child support. You know what I mean? So it goes on both ends. So those are my thoughts.
It's not that she couldn't have answered it. She's an intelligent, bright woman. I'm sure she knows how to define a woman, even though she's not a biologist. It's that she chose not to. And when I think about why she chose not to, I may have done the same thing if I were in her position at that time, given the controversy, and that this may be an issue that will be before the Supreme Court before we know it.
Yeah, and this is another issue too that I definitely see, particularly on the left, especially when it comes to Black women, is that when we see another person who looks like us, who is being confirmed as vice president, as SCOTUS, we take what they say, and regardless of values and what's right for our society, we side with them and make excuses for them because they're Black women. And I feel like within our communities, and like I'm saying this as a Black person, as a Black woman, we have to do better with that. We have to hold people accountable, not because, oh, she's a Black woman and she's being questioned and it's inappropriate and all this other stuff. No, she's being confirmed as a Supreme Court justice. She has to go through that process. She has to answer these hard questions. I saw the same thing with VP Harris. We make excuses, and based on the numbers, us as a community, Black women, we vote 80% for the left. And then when these individuals get into office, it's a disaster and everybody's quiet. We have to do better about that. But because a lot of us are triggered by race, and because we see a person who looks like us in power or potentially can be in power, we make excuses. And that's very frustrating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for those who don't do the research, particularly in this instance, on the candidate, and I think that goes for all races, Black, Asian, Hispanic, I think we can reasonably say that they're going to be more likely to support a candidate that looks like them. I mean, representation matters. And that's important for some people in regards to who their party, who they're voting for, and who they want on these high positions of leadership. To what you just said, I think that definitely occurs in all communities, not just the Black community, and which is why it's important that we do our background on these candidates. As it concerns Judge Brown Jackson, I not only support her because she has a very distinguished, qualified record, and we can go into that. And not only that, but I know that she's going to bring unparalleled experience and discretion to the court that the court hasn't had in decades, since the 115 justices have been nominated and confirmed to that court. But also I've read some of her opinions, and her opinions are in line with my interest as an American citizen and as a Black woman. So that's why I support her. So I've actually done my research on this, not because she's just Black and she's a woman, but it's because I agree with her substance and some of the decisions that she's issued majorly, more so than I would agree with Judge Childs, Michelle Childs. That was Lindsey Graham was pushing for in his state of South Carolina. So while I understand what you're saying, and it certainly would be frustrating, that happens in all communities. And again, it's why we have to do our research. No matter their race, whether they look like us or not, we have to do our research. Read their opinions. I don't know how many people have actually read some of her opinions. Read them. Is it something that you want to continue to see? Do you like the way she applies the law? Are you a fan of her judicial philosophy? That's one of the things that a lot of the conservatives wanted to get out of her, and which they did. Do you think she's qualified for the position? These are all factors that we need to be considering outside of someone's race and their gender.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of wrap things up, yes, I do feel like she is qualified on paper, but I think what matters is, and like a lot of Americans share this, concern as well, is how will she rule on some of the controversial cases that are controversial policies and values that were being seen pushed by this administration, pushed by the left, CRT, termination of pregnancies. These things matter, especially with Roe v. Wade potentially being overruled. This isn't coming up just to come up. These issues matter, especially in our country. And I don't know exactly what's exactly going to happen. I feel like it's likely she's going to be confirmed, but we'll have to see. So again, that's a WAP.
Yeah, and for me, I do think it's likely to be confirmed. And aside from whether people are supporting her or not in regards to if she leans more conservative or leftist, I really do think this is one of the most neutral judges we've seen. If confirmed, that would be on the bench. I'd also want to just note her endorsements, the array of diversity in that, in regards to conservative attorney generals and Democrat attorney generals that have endorsed her. Some of the largest police organizations, Fraternal Order of Police, I think it's called, and Chief of Police, where there's an array of diversity in regards to whether they lean right or left, that have also endorsed her. And so all of those things speak in evidence that this is someone that may be more neutral and not as left as some may think, and not as conservative. And I think we got that from the hearings, and I think we've seen that from people who testified on behalf of her, but also the endorsements that we've seen too. This is someone that actually, because of her neutrality, will really bring a difference to this court, and also just her background as a public defender. There's no current Supreme Court justice who has ever served as a federal public defender as Judge Brown Jackson has served. So that brings a completely different perspective. And so